Hey everyone, here with the frame test video that I promised earlier this week in the graphics comparison video, which if you haven't seen that yet, do go and check that out. As you can see by now, we're going through the settings so you can see what exactly we're dealing with. Obviously, if there's anything different from the settings that are being shown now, I will let you know in the footage. As for the frames, interestingly enough, running the in-game benchmark gave me some rather interesting results where maxing it out with ray tracing and maxing it out with ray tracing and DLSS seemingly has very little difference in between the two different modes. DLSS is a bit of an interesting one, as I did a bit of testing, and from my experience there seems to be either a minimal difference or no difference at all when having it on performance mode. Obviously, this is on a higher end system, so this might be different for you if you have a system that's a bit more on the medium or on the lower end of things. But personally, DLSS to me just seems to be only doing one thing, and is just making the game look weirdly blurry at times and doesn't give me any sort of notable improvements to my frame rate. So personally, I'll be keeping it off because, yeah, I don't see much of a reason to keep it on, in all honesty. It is worth noting, though, that the current version of DLSS that's being used is the one from January 31st, which is 3.7.1. DLSS 4 support is simply just gonna have to come from NVIDIA, so maybe later down the line in a couple of weeks or so, we'll be seeing DLSS 4 support for the PC version, and then hopefully we'll see some actual more noticeable improvements. But if that happens, I'll be sure to let you know through Twitter or community posts or whatever the case may be. Interestingly enough, even on the absolute lowest settings, I don't seem to be able to go past 164 FPS. Driving in Blaine County in single player, yes, you can tell, it's not looking great, but the frames don't seem to be going past that, which, I don't know, maybe the game is like kind of hard capped to not go past that frame limit now, or whatever the case may be, or is it simply me thinking that I have a much better system and should be running higher FPS than I actually am. Interestingly enough though, I did do a benchmark with these same settings and even going as far as lowering my resolution, and at that point I did see like 200 plus FPS happening as well, so maybe it's an in-game thing, I don't quite know. It's kind of odd and I can't really put my finger on it too much, but one thing that I can definitely put my finger on though is Rico. Interestingly enough, again, ray tracing and ray tracing DLSS don't seem to be having any sort of massive differences in terms of frames, so DLSS, once again, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to use unless you're trying to squeeze out like 5 to 10 more FPS. When it comes to the major frame killer in the legacy version though, which is grass, that actually has seen a noticeable improvement. The difference between having your grass set on ultra and having your grass set on normal, once again, is a difference of 5 to 10 FPS. And that is actually probably the best improvement to this entire version. Rico actually runs smoothly now, which is amazing. Obviously, the footage you're looking at is without ray tracing, but you get the gist of it. This is fantastic. When it comes to the city drive, once again, having no ray tracing on here and also comparing it to having DLSS on and off. Funny enough, as you can tell by the footage, it seems that without DLSS, I actually have better frame rate. Now, it is worth noting, obviously, this is an online session with 25 players, if I recall correctly. So there is always going to be a variable margin of error, given the fact that while I'm not only able to not drive in a straight line, there's obviously plenty of going on within an online session, which is why I also decided to just jump into an invite-only session and have a look over there. The frame rates there are also even more respectable, with frame rates going as high as 150 and 160 when flying around in a helicopter over the ocean. The city drive is also rather respectable too, with some higher frame rates, and I believe, if I recall correctly, 130, 140 has definitely been seen plenty of times too, so which is obviously another very nice improvement from the legacy version, although the legacy version I was able to run in higher frame rates on the invite-only sessions. However, that's obviously a legacy version which has worse graphics and worse details, etc., so that is worth keeping in mind. Also, that version version had stutters when I went above 160 FPS, so I guess it's all a positive after all. On the Cayo Perico Island, a similar thing happens too, with once again a noticeable improvement by playing in an invite-only session. But the difference in Cayo isn't actually that much higher than if I were to be playing in a public session, which probably has to do with the fact that if you're going to Cayo Island, you're in a different instance. I'm kind of talking out of my ass here, so don't take that too much of a fact there, but regardless, across the board, I'm very satisfied with how the frame rate has been a noticeable improvement while not actually having to sacrifice your graphics settings either. That is probably the biggest thing about this version. Another nice thing too is that you can seemingly also change a lot of the settings on the fly. I was able to change the grass settings while I was on Cayo Perico without having to restart my game, which is absolutely fantastic, which means that if you were to do a Cayo Perico heist and you don't feel like dealing with all the grass, you can just turn it off. And I have to honestly say that the enhanced version, while in terms of graphics, is probably gonna have to be zoomed in a bit more to really tell like the major differences and stuff like that, especially if you use the legacy version on like one of those higher graphics settings. Frame rate wise though, it's been a very positive and noticeable improvement, and overall it's just a very nice to have. It's a free upgrade, and if your PC can run it, even if it kind of can't, it is definitely worth checking out just for those improvements and making the GTA Online experience especially a much nicer experience. Especially considering the fact that at the time of recording there's no mod menus on there, so you can actually play the game without getting your shit crashed. Fantastic! Finally though, before I should go, I do have to kind of end on a little bit of a sour note, if you will. According to Ibex, who's a member of my community with like ties to speedrunners for heisting and stuff like that, the FPS issue affecting vehicle speeds has not been fixed. If you're wondering what I'm on about, basically the higher frames that you have, the faster your vehicle will go. Which obviously, if you're playing a race, is gonna create some unfair advantages. On the PS5 and Xbox Series version of the game, this was not an issue, but on PC that unfortunately still seems to be a thing, which is definitely a bit of a shame. But at the same time, it's really gonna make me curious what HSW vehicle speeds are gonna be like on PC on those higher frames. Personally though, I'll probably be playing the game without DLSS and without ray tracing, as it seems to be for me the best way to get the highest amount of frames, while not having to sacrifice like ultra grass and that sort of stuff, which is also very nice. With that said though, do let me know in your comments down below how the PC version has been for you, as I'm rather curious about how the experience has been for everyone on like different kinds of setups and systems. From my own personal experience with my community when I asked them, it seems to have been a very positive improvement, so I'm very curious to see if that is the same across the board. With that said though, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all later.